Well, this film is something of a sentimental journey for me because this is where I grew up. It's Ogmore Vale, one of the three mining valleys north of Bridgend. It's now a typical post-industrial community, and you have to look very carefully to find any traces whatsoever of coal mining since the collieries were swept away in the 1980s. But when I was a kid here in the 1950s, well, mining still dominated, and the passage of time was marked by colliery routers sounding off for the change of shifts. And I also remember, especially on New Year's Eve, when at midnight all the collieries would sound their hooters. The Wyndham, the Ocean, and the Penllyn Gwent. You know, the passage of time was also marked by a strange, well, I don't know, almost magical clock. And that clock determined the way that games and pastimes came and went throughout the year. I had a really great friend, a chap by the name of Howard Myrig, who was born in 1913 and lived for a long time in Risca. And he wrote to me in 1976.
We became aware of the rules of society for the first time, for it was surprising how organised the lives of children were at that time, and not organised by adults, but by custom probably handed down for generations. It's obvious that conker time took place in the autumn, but what mysterious agency decreed when it was to be bow and arrow time, top time, kite time, marbles time, and so on? These periods came and went with unfailing regularity year by year, and we never played those particular games save at the appropriate time.
Well, I think summed up exactly what it was all about, being kids in the valleys, in the mining areas of South Wales. So I'm sure many can recall the time when your pockets bulged with a bag full of marbles, and there were your special glassies, the clays, and the very, very best one, which was your tor. And of course, the games of marbles had, like so many other games, strict rules that had to be agreed beforehand. And so it would be no bolshies, no adging, and winner takes tors. And bolshies were so often forbidden because they were the steel ball bearings that you could find knocking around in the colliery. And one of them, rolled at speed, could easily devastate the much smaller glassies and clays. Why they were called bolshies I never knew, but I also know that they were called iron boasters elsewhere in the coalfield. Being brought up in a mining community, well, of course, every colliery had its own carpenter shop, had its own blacksmith shop, and if you were very lucky, the local blacksmith might make you a hook and wheel, and what fun that was. This is a very, very ancient game. It dates back many centuries, and as we can see from this photograph of these Canadian kids in the 1900s, it played across the world, and it required great skill and agility to keep that wheel balanced and keep it going for long periods of time. In our street in Ogmore Vale, we were particularly fortunate because there was a good balance of girls and boys. So the games we played involved both sexes, and one of the great games was skipping. And this could be quite a ferocious activity going at very, very high speed. And all the skipping games had their own rhymes, and I remember one which was, "The farmer wants a wife, the farmer wants a wife, E-I-E-I-E-O, the farmer wants a wife." And then it would go on with different verses so that the skipping could last for a long, long time. And I also wonder who recalls ball games like Queenie and King and Stand. There was another game I remember which was called Statues, but now I just can't recall exactly how it was played. And what is interesting is that the games that were played right the way across the valleys and the townships of South Wales, well, they were the same games, but they just might have different names. Summertime had its own particular pleasures, and one of them was building ponds, or dams as we called them, across the river. And that was a technique that required two banks of stones infilled with clodgings, and then it was a wonderful place to have an open-air swimming and bathing pool. And Howell Myrig recalled that
diving we always referred to as ducking, and a belly flop was a gutser, a furious argument as to whether one had done it or not, for it was accounted something of a disgrace.
And if you were truly optimistic, you could have your go at tickling trout, although 100 years of pollution had put paid to all but the hardiest of the species. In the winter evenings, of course, we gathered beneath the street lights. And these weren't the great big orange lamps that we're familiar with today. These were just small, almost ordinary bulbs in the lampposts there. But the lamppost was a wonderful thing because it provided a back. And a back was a very important part of the game of strong horses. Usually the back was the smallest of the gang, and his job was to act as a buffer for the rest of the team. It was an activity not for the faint heart or for the weak, as it involved as many boys as possible leaping on the backs of the opposing team, bent over nose to tail, and balancing there long enough while bearing the weight. And we had different chants. We used to chant 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, strong horses all over, again, again. And Howard remembers in Risca they chanted, Un, dau, tri, capillary V. Oglevale was very much part and parcel of the anglicised area of the coalfield, and there wasn't a great deal of spoken Welsh in the 1950s, but Welsh was ever present in our structure of the language, the sentences and the vocabulary, and in the game of catty and doggy, for instance. The distances were measured in kams, a corruption of cam, which was the Welsh word for pace or step. It would be really fascinating to know what other names it was called across the coalfield. And under the cover of darkness, well, there were lots of opportunities for mischief. A few copies of the Glamorgan Gazette, a box of matches, and away we went. The potential was enormous. The downpipes in the street were, of course, made of cast iron, and they were perfect for devil up the drain pipe. And that involved rolling up a couple of sheets of paper, of the newspaper, pushing them up the pipes right the way along the length of the terrace, and the longer the street the better, and then lighting them. And the rush of hot air upwards caused a most gratifying, unearthly sound. Enough to bring the occupants out of their houses. But of course, not a sport but these days of plastic. There were many more games and pastimes that we played, but these are just a few to hopefully stimulate a few memories of what now seems to be a far, far distant time.